Hey guys, so today we are answering a subscriber question, and the question in question was, Frederick, what is a programmer's worst nightmare? So let's get into it. Oh, how could we possibly answer that? I mean, there's so much to be afraid of. But I will do my best, and I will give you an answer to what I think is probably one of the most scariest things, and a way to probably solve that for you. So, I don't know if you've ever been here, but it's especially when you're on a tight deadline, this is absolutely vicious. And especially, ideally, when you're a little bit more junior, and maybe not necessarily junior in skill, but junior in your personal development, and you are a little bit of what we call a people pleaser, and you have this need to accommodate people, and you don't really have the courage to let people down because that makes you feel bad. So when you're in that magical state in your life, and there's quite a few people who are, you might be working on a story, you think you understand it, you've been told kind of what to do, and you think that you roughly have a good estimation of how long it's going to take. You give away an estimation, you just utter those words. You do this classical thing. Somebody comes in and says, hey, I need this thing by then and then, can you fix it? And then you're not really sure, and you kind of go, but you still say, yeah, sure, I'll fix it. It's just a small fix, right? As soon as you do that, that's the first mistake. That's when it starts, because now you've set expectations towards somebody else out there, and it should probably be someone fairly important as well, like your CEO or something. And ideally that should be a very grumpy old man who will, or a very young, ambitious, angry guy who will yell at you if things aren't up to scratch, right? Said and done. You start working. That's mistake number 2. And you start working, you go through this route, you're trying to fix this feature, and there's a few bugs, and then there's a few more bugs, and your deadline is closing in, and then you hit that magical requirement that's part of all of this. And you can't fix it. You look at this at your problem. You've worked for some time, weeks maybe. And you get to this point where the requirement cannot be fulfilled, but it's the main requirement. You cannot do it because of reasons. That is, in my world, the absolute worst thing. Because now, not only have you set expectations, you have told your stakeholder somehow that, yeah, we're going to get this fixed, which if you're really unlucky, that person has gone in turn to your customers or somebody else. There might be a project going on and other stakeholders outside of the company, and people are depending on you. And now you've said that you're going to do this and you can't, and what's even worse is that you haven't communicated about it, so they've just been probably planning out everything towards that this is going to be released now. You haven't really talked about it anymore, and now you're sitting there and you realize that, wow, I'm going to be held responsible for not being able to ship this. And I can't fix it because we have this other part of the system that works in a specific way, and in order for me to do this at all, I need to probably rewrite some stuff, or I'm going to have to need even more time to do this, and there's no way around it. So now you're in this magical moment where you have to just go and face the music. That is probably one of the worst things that can happen to a programmer, apart from maybe deleting the production database. That's also up there with like the worst possible scenario that you can possibly imagine. So let's talk about how to actually solve this, how to not get into this position. Number 1, if we're talking, just heads up, you should have fallbacks and fail-safes on your production database. That's just given. You should have that, because otherwise, if you are even able to delete your production database, then you're doing it wrong. I'm sorry. Anywho, the other part. The first mistake I mentioned was that you basically just told, after being asked to deliver something, you told your stakeholder directly right off the bat that, yeah, sure, I can fix it. Bullshit. That's wrong answer. That's your first mistake. If you do not take the time to make an informed decision when you estimate a piece of work, you have already set yourself up for potential failure. Unless your job is literally go and change one line of code and you have that code fresh in your head, you should always estimate it. And the way that you should do this is that you should sit down, you should tell your stakeholder, let's sit down and have a, let's have a sit down. We will talk about the requirements and then we will walk through and visualize the steps for how this should work. That's you getting the requirements. That is one of the most important parts of your job, to have clarity in understanding what it is that you can deliver. Because I can tell you right now, I've met super programmers who are geniuses with code, who cannot talk to people, who can't get requirements, and they will not, even though they can write code like the wind, they can't actually deliver the correct features because they don't even know what the real requirements are. That's where the people skills comes in. So you sit down, you have a discussion, you write out every single step in the sequence of things that are going to happen from, all right, so this is the expectation, this is how it's going to work, this is how the behavior is going to be, and you map out all of the things so you have a clear step-by-step path as to all the steps that you need to take in order to deliver this. That's basically creating stories. You need to talk about each and every one of them, because just from having the conversation, you are going to realize things. Your stakeholder is going to realize things. That conversation is going to set expectations. That's the most important part. Said and done. That's number one. Number two is that so you start working. That's the second problem that you had. You just went in, started working. When you sit down with a story, you need to really think about, okay, what all are the steps that you need to take? In other words, you should map out your personal steps. Map out, okay, I need to first do this, and then that, and then that, and then that, and then that. I should probably do this, and then this, and this. Create a list for yourself for each story that you're going to have, and map that out so that you know for a fact, because once again, that's going to force you to think about every step. And that is what programming is, guys. It's just a sequence of steps. You have to think about each step, because if you do before you start working, the odds of you finding out that there's a limitation or there's something that's going to be a problem for you or an unknown is going to happen. You're going to get to that point where you might find some stuff that is unknown to you. You should figure out these unknowns before you actually start working, because otherwise you get to the worst case, which was, what was the worst case? The worst case is that you have already invested tons and tons of time. You've been working all of this stuff that you know how to do, and then you get to an unknown part of the system and you realize that, shit, I can't actually solve this in this manner. But had you already made the investigation up front and actually checked out that you know that you can actually do all these things before you started working, odds are that you wouldn't get into that situation in the first place. So what I want you to take away from this is that, number one, don't ever, like if you want to avoid your worst case scenario, don't ever skip the estimation and the grooming process and making sure that you and your stakeholder have a very clear picture of all the steps that is going to be included in delivering a story. You need to know your requirements and what is expected, so you know the definition of done. Second part, you should at no point just start working without planning out the steps that you need to take in order to deliver a piece of work. And if you have unknown things in your process, unknown steps, you don't really know how to do that, check those out. Make sure that you check that first, so you kind of know how that should be solved before you start working. Because if these things include something that is going to fuck up the rest of your flow, you need to rethink your solution. And lastly, make sure that your production database has backups. Have a great day.